We've all seen footage of kamikaze attacks hitting warships during World War II, but have you ever wondered what actually happened to the sailors on deck when one of those planes came screaming down? The reality was far more brutal than most people imagine, especially for the crew members who had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide when death came diving from the sky at 300 miles per hour. By 1944, the Japanese were getting desperate. Their experienced pilots were gone, their carriers were sitting on the ocean floor, and American forces were closing in on the home islands. That's when they made a decision that would terrorize Allied sailors for the rest of the war. Instead of trying to train new pilots for months, they would teach young men just enough to get a plane in the air, point it at an enemy ship, and dive straight into it. The first organized kamikaze attacks began during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. American sailors had no idea what they were about to face. They'd dealt with conventional air attacks before, but this was something entirely different. When a regular bomber came in, you could shoot it down or damage it enough to make the pilot turn away. But when someone is already planning to die, there's no turning back. What made these attacks so devastating wasn't just the explosions. It was the fact that kamikaze pilots specifically targeted the most vulnerable parts of a ship where sailors worked in the open. Flight decks on aircraft carriers were packed with crew members fueling planes, loading ammunition, and directing aircraft operations. These men had no armor protection, no bunkers to hide in, just the clothes on their backs and whatever cover they could find behind equipment. When a kamikaze hit, the first thing that happened was the impact itself. A fully loaded fighter plane weighing several tons, slamming into a deck at maximum speed, created an instant crater of twisted metal and debris. But that was just the beginning. The plane's fuel tanks would rupture on impact, spreading aviation gasoline across everything within 100 feet. Then came the fire. Aviation fuel burns differently than regular gasoline. It spreads faster, burns hotter, and creates thick black smoke that can suffocate you before the flames even reach you. Deck crews caught in the initial blast zone had seconds to react, but most never got the chance. The lucky ones were killed instantly by the impact or explosion. The unlucky ones had to deal with what came next. Sailors who survived the initial hit found themselves trapped in a nightmare scenario. The deck plating, heated to extreme temperatures by burning fuel, would literally cook anyone who tried to crawl across it. Equipment that moments before had been tools for maintaining aircraft now became red-hot obstacles that could burn through clothing and flesh in seconds. Emergency exits that should have provided escape routes were often blocked by wreckage or engulfed in flames. But the kamikaze attacks weren't random. Japanese pilots were trained to identify the most critical areas of enemy ships and aim for maximum damage. On aircraft carriers, they targeted the flight deck where planes were being serviced. On destroyers and cruisers, they went for the superstructure where radar operators and gunners worked. They understood that killing trained personnel was just as important as damaging the ship itself. The psychological impact was just as brutal as the physical damage. Imagine being a 20-year-old sailor from Kansas who'd never seen combat before, suddenly watching a plane deliberately fly straight into your ship with the sole purpose of killing you and everyone around you. There was no negotiating with it, no way to make it stop, no chance of the pilot changing his mind at the last second. Recovery teams who had to clean up after these attacks saw things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The combination of high-speed impact, explosions, and intense fire left behind scenes that were difficult to process. Bodies were often found fused to the deck plating by the intense heat, their remains scattered across hundreds of square feet by the initial explosion. Some sailors were discovered in positions that showed they'd tried to shield themselves behind equipment that had melted around them. Others were found in groups where they'd attempted to help wounded shipmates, only to be overcome by smoke and flames before they could escape. The medical crews faced impossible situations. Traditional triage methods broke down when dealing with the unique injuries caused by kamikaze attacks. Burns from aviation fuel created wounds unlike anything doctors had trained for. The fuel penetrated clothing and continued burning against the skin, causing deep tissue damage that often proved fatal even days after the attack. Smoke inhalation from the toxic fumes left survivors with lung damage that would affect them for years. What made the situation even worse was that these attacks often came in waves. Just as rescue teams began pulling survivors from the wreckage of the first hit, lookouts would spot more planes approaching. Sailors who'd managed to escape the initial attack now faced the terrifying choice of staying on deck to help wounded shipmates or seeking shelter below, knowing that another kamikaze could strike at any moment. The Japanese refined their tactics as the war progressed. They learned that targeting the base of the ship's island structure on aircraft carriers could knock out communications and fire control systems while trapping personnel in the confined spaces below. They discovered that hitting ammunition storage areas could trigger secondary explosions that would tear through multiple decks, killing sailors who thought they were safe in the ship's interior. Deck crews developed their own survival techniques, though many were desperate measures born from pure instinct. Some sailors learned to identify the sound of a diving kamikaze and would throw themselves overboard rather than face the flames. Others memorized every possible escape route on their section of the ship, knowing they might have only seconds to find safety. Gun crews manning anti-aircraft weapons faced an impossible situation, having to stay at their posts and keep firing, even as a plane dove straight toward them. The aftermath of successful kamikaze attacks created logistical nightmares for ship commanders. Damaged vessels had to continue operating with reduced crews while dealing with extensive casualties. Sailors who survived one attack often had to immediately begin preparing for the next wave, working around the bodies of their shipmates and the twisted wreckage of their workplace. The psychological toll was immense, but there was no time to process what had happened. Even ships that successfully shot down approaching kamikazes weren't safe. Debris from destroyed aircraft would rain down on the deck, and sometimes the plane's momentum would carry burning wreckage directly into groups of sailors. The fragments of engines, propellers, and fuel tanks became deadly projectiles that could kill crew members hundreds of feet away from where the plane was actually destroyed. D. The kamikaze attacks of 1944 and 1945 represent one of the most horrific chapters in naval warfare history. For the young sailors who served on the decks of Allied warships, these weren't just military engagements. They were encounters with an enemy willing to die for the sole purpose of taking as many of them down as possible. The deck crews, aviation mechanics, gunners, and countless other personnel who kept these ships running paid an unimaginable price during those final months of the Pacific War. What makes their story even more tragic is that many of these sailors were barely out of high school, kids from small towns across America who'd never imagined they'd face such deliberate, calculated violence. They signed up to serve their country, not to be hunted by pilots who'd already written their own death sentences. Yet they stayed at their posts, kept the planes flying, and continued fighting even when they knew the next attack could be their last. The legacy of what happened to these deck crews serves as a reminder of the true cost of war, measured not just in ships sunk or battles won, but in the individual human beings who paid the ultimate price. Their sacrifice helped end the war, but the price they paid was written in blood across the decks of every ship that faced the divine wind.